Unearthed Secrets, the sinister temple of the cursed island. 7 terrifying truths revealed. George Johnson thought life in their quaint coastal town of Willow Creek was as perfect as it could get. Yet all that tranquility was upended when a shocking envelope arrived at their doorstep, sealed with a promise of dread. Inside lay the deed to a desolate island, rumored to host a temple buried deep beneath the twisted trees. Their hearts raced with a mix of excitement and anxiety. This was not just an inheritance, it felt like a curse whispered since the beginning of time. At first, the island was a picturesque escape, draped in vibrant sunsets and serene waves. But the longer they stayed, the more weight enveloped them. The allure of adventure soon dulled under the heavy shadows lurking at the edges of trees, black silhouettes that seemed to watch them. Ancient carvings peeked out from crumbling rocks like the eyes of something long dead but unwilling to stay buried. "We should explore further," George urged, eager to uncover secrets hidden since ages past, but Emma hesitated, a chill crawling down her spine. Mia, with wide eyes, jumped at every rustle, hearing voices whisper through the dense foliage, yet her fears were met with dismissive smiles. As night fell, they settled into their cabin, safe against the unknown. But with each flash of lightning, the air thickened with an oppressive weight. Then came the scratching, soft but insistent. The walls groaned ominously, echoing the unease gathering within their hearts. The dread pooled heavy in the pit of their stomachs, but George clutched at his optimism. "Just our imaginations," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Before they could shake their unease, storm winds gutted through the trees, their familiar surroundings now distorting into a nightmarish landscape. It felt like the island was alive, markings deep in the earth stirring to life. The locals, once friendly faces, now tilted their heads in quiet horror, murmurs of dark sacrifices slipping from their lips as they turned their backs. Whispers filled the spaces where laughter used to be, each conversation a reminder that too many secrets were hidden behind those cheerful facades. "Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen." Now let's continue. With determination bubbling in his chest, George led them down a hidden path, thorns clawing at their legs. The air turned thick with unspoken warnings. In the fading light, they uncovered the temple's remains, hushed under choking vines and shadowy memories. Each creak of the timber above sent jolts of panic through Mia. Symbols carved deep into stone whispered the terrible histories of offerings that were once made, sacrifices to appease something that craved more than just life. It felt wrong, oppressive, a reminder that they'd trespassed into a realm where time wove cruelty with devotion. As darkness enveloped them, ghostly figures flitted in and out of sight, their mournful whispers calling out to Mia, echoing the fears that filled her thoughts. The ground rumbled, and the temple seemed to breathe as unseen eyes fixed upon the Johnsons. George's heart raced. He realized with horror that Mr. Holloway, their neighbor who had seemed supportive, wasn't just a false ally. He was a conduit to the terror that brewed just beneath the surface, one that demanded a harvest of souls to feel whole. With spores of dread spilling within him, George faced an agonizing choice: flee from the island and the sinister grip of their neighbors, or confront the ancient malevolence lying in wait. In the suffocating silence, the night screamed for them to choose, but what awaited them if they did? The first crack of dawn brought no solace. The wind howled through the trees, groaning as if in warning. George awoke with a jolt, heart pounding against the ribcage like a trapped animal. Mia lay curled up at the foot of the bed, still clutching her stuffed bear, its button eyes reflecting the fear that filled the room. Emma sat on the edge of the mattress, staring into the empty space where shadows danced as the warm light fought through the cracks. "Did you hear that?" Emma's voice shook, barely above a whisper. George nodded, the memory of last night's restless scratching crawling back as the sunlight bled into the room. His mind whirred, replaying the night's haunting whispers. What had he done? The thrill of the adventure felt curdled now, poisoned by the island's sinister embrace. Mia stirred, rubbing her eyes. I had a bad dream, she said, her voice small. About those things in the trees. They were watching, waiting. I know, sweetie, Emma soothed, sweeping Mia into her arms. But it's just a dream. Let us not dwell on it. But George saw the way her eyes darted to the window, full of unspoken terror. They gathered their gear, unease riding on each of their shoulders. Today was destined for exploration, but the island's watchful gaze loomed heavy, pressing down like an iron weight. As they stepped outside, a dense mist enveloped them, swirling like a restless specter. Each step felt like an invitation to an unseen force. Let us head back to that temple, George decided, gripping the old map buried deep in his pocket. We didn't explore it fully. There has to be a reason those symbols were carved into the stone. Emma's hesitation hung thick in the air. What if we shouldn't? What if it's unsafe? It's just a bunch of rocks, George snapped, then caught himself, feeling the sting of his words. Sorry, I think there's something we need to understand before we can leave. The trees closed in around them, branches like gnarled fingers trying to snatch at their clothes. A cold shiver ran through George. The island seemed more alive than before, whispering curses in a language only it understood. They reached the temple, its once majestic features now choked and bruised by writhing vines. George approached the altar, and the air hummed in an unsettling harmony. Runes seemed to ripple, beckoning to him like moths drawn to a flame. He traced one with trembling fingers, a jagged line intersecting another, unknowingly unlocking a floodgate of memories. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath them. Emma screamed. Something's happening. Dark soil shifted, revealing glimpses of what lay buried below. A skeletal hand, wrapped in rusted chains, clawed at the earth. Panic surged. George staggered back, breath hitching in his throat. Get back! He shouted, but it was too late. The world around them pulled at the seams. The air crackled with dread as a chorus of whispers filled the silence, echoing the essence of their deepest fears. Images flashed before his eyes, shadowy figures praying, bloody offerings pouring from the cracks. Mia, frozen in shock, pointed at the altar. Look! The symbols, they're glowing. George's heart raced, absorbing the enormity of the moment. What were they awakening? His instincts screamed for them to run, but curiosity rooted them in place. As the temple shook, the whispers twisted into a cacophony of growls, each voice pleading for release. We need to get out. Emma yelled, urgency fueling her words. But as they turned to flee, a blinding light engulfed the altar, revealing a door hidden beneath the stone. What if we just looked? George mumbled, hesitating, curiosity battling survival instinct. But as the door creaked open, a deafening roar vibrated from deep within the earth. What are we doing? Emma gasped, eyes wide with terror. A voice, deep and ancient, beckoned from the darkness below, promising truths that could shatter their souls. In that moment, the choice loomed again, heavy and inevitable. Treading into the unknown, they'd either unveil the heart of the island's curse or become part of its cursed history. The light flickered, shadows whispered louder, and George felt the ground beneath him begin to split. Will we dare to find out the secrets that lie below? He wondered, staring into the gaping darkness, but before an answer could materialize, the shadows rushed in, consuming their voices, pulling them deeper into the temple's insatiable belly. What lay waiting in the depths was a revelation none could fathom. The cold, damp air rushed around them as they were swallowed by the darkness. George stumbled forward, pulled by an unseen force. Panic coursed through his veins. The light from the altar flickered, revealing swirling mist that clung to their skin like a shroud. Mia! Emma shouted, the desperation in her voice piercing through the suffocating shadows. George turned just in time to see Mia clutching her stuffed bear, her wide eyes reflecting the dim light. She looked so small, so vulnerable. Stay close. George barked, trying to keep the tremor from his voice. Emma did not answer. Her eyes were darting all around, searching for something, anything to latch onto. The ground quaked underfoot, a sinister rhythm matching the pounding of George's heart. It felt alive, pulsing with a hidden malevolence. The temple walls seemed to breathe, silhouettes shifting in the gloom, echoing the nightmarish whispers that had taunted them just moments before. What did we do? Emma cried out, panic creeping into her words as terror etched lines onto her face. We shouldn't have opened that door. Mia squeezed her eyes shut, clutching her bear tighter. Daddy, I'm scared. Her voice trembled, and in that moment, George felt the crippling weight of fear settle over him. We're all scared, but we can't stop now, he said, forcing resolve into his tone. The darkness curled around them, whispering secrets meant to torment. They moved deeper into the belly of the temple, the air thickening with a stench of rot. The ground, slick with mud and something else, sapped their balance with every cautious step. In the dim glow from the altar behind them, bizarre markings glimmered on the walls, depicting scenes of ritualistic madness that made George's stomach churn. Then, without warning, the whispers crescendoed into a shriek. They stumbled backward as the walls themselves seemed to pulse, and the shadows lunged forward. Something moved within their depths, something massive and hungry. Run! George shouted. But the path behind them was gone, swallowed by the temple's insatiable hunger. They faced the encroaching darkness, which ebbed and flowed like a tide. Emma's nails dug into George's arm, and he could feel her heart racing. What do we do? We're trapped. Find a way out. He shouted, searching wildly for anything that looked familiar, anything that might help them escape. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was small, at first indistinct, but as it stepped into the flickering light, George's stomach twisted. It mirrored Mia's form, yet its features were grotesque, stretched and twisted. Black eyes gleamed like coal, a curled smile that promised nothing but despair. Mia! George yelled, pulling his daughter behind him as a wave of icy dread washed over him. Why did you awaken us? The figure rasped, voice a mournful echo that sent chills through George's bones. Awaken who? Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure pointed toward a swirling darkness beyond them. The ones who sleep shall feed sacrifice made from the living. What are you talking about? George shouted, his voice cracking with fear. The realization hit him: this wasn't just a temple. This was a trap. Another roar echoed through the chamber, deep and guttural. The walls trembled, a chorus of whispers steeped in rage as the shadows writhed, coiling around their feet. Without thinking, George lunged for the darkness, seeking to outrun the horrors it promised. In that moment, the ground beneath them split wide, revealing a chasm of nothingness below. The shadows beckoned, ready to swallow them whole. Hold on! George cried, but horror washed over him as he realized Mia had slipped from his grasp. Mia! He screamed, the word tearing from his throat as her terrified face faded into the yawning void. The darkness surged, and the last thing he heard was the echo of her name swallowed by the abyss. His heart raced as he teetered at the edge, knowing they were tied to something far worse than he could comprehend. What lay in wait beneath them wasn't just a secret, it was a curse demanding to be fulfilled. Desperation clawed at his insides. Would they pay the price, or could they unravel the threads that bound them to this nightmare? George stood at the precipice, his heart hammering in his chest. The cold void yawned beneath him, pulsing with the same ominous rhythm that echoed through the temple. He felt Emma's grip tighten on his arm, her panic rising like bile in his throat. Mia! He shouted again, his voice raw. The darkness seemed to mock him, swallowing the sound before it reached the edges of the chasm. A low growl reverberated in response, as if the abyss welcomed him with open arms, promising an eternal embrace. Look! Emma's voice broke through his desperation. She pointed to the flickering altar behind them, where the shadows twisted unnaturally. What if we shine some light? Are you crazy? George snapped, but a flicker of hope ignited within him. Without another word, he turned back toward the altar. The light, although dim, seemed to pulse with an energy that could cut through the darkness surrounding them. As they rushed towards it, the air thickened, pressing against their skin. The walls seemed to close in, shadows reaching out like clawed fingers, scratching at their flesh. Every step felt like a battle against a mighty tide, dragging them backward. "Stay strong, Mia," George yelled, searching desperately for the source of the flickering light. The altar now loomed large before them, the grotesque symbols glinting ominously. An ancient dagger sat atop it, shimmering with an otherworldly sheen. "Is that what they want?" Emma whispered, her eyes wide with realization. A sacrifice. George's mind raced. "No, we can't," he breathed, his skin crawling. "We can't give in to their demands." He knew what the figure had meant. This was more than a test, it was a ritual steeped in blood and terror. But the shadows were relentless, creeping closer, grabbing at their ankles. George could feel the darkness weighing him down, dragging his thoughts into despair. "Mia!" He shouted again, searching the murky depths for any trace of her. "We need to find her." Suddenly, a piercing shriek erupted from the altar. The dagger trembled as if alive, vibrating ominously. It caught the flickering light, sending a shiver of cold through George. Something materialized beside it, a specter rising, taking form, as shadowy tendrils wrapped around it. A face appeared, a familiar one, twisted in agony and rage. It was Mia, her expression deformed, eyes black and unrecognizable. "Daddy!" she wailed, her voice soaked in despair. "Help me!" "No!" George screamed, fighting against the pull of the darkness that surrounded him. He lunged for the shimmering dagger, grasping it tightly. In that instant, every horror and memory flooded back to him. The door they had opened, the whispers, the shadows' instinct kicked in. He thrust the dagger into the altar, and the ground shook violently. The specter wailed, the chilling sound echoing through the temple, cracking the very air. "Stop!" Emma cried, her eyes screaming with fear. "What are you doing?" "Saving her," he shouted back, but doubt clawed at him. The dagger was the key, and perhaps it could reveal more than it consumed. The altar shuddered as the shadows screamed in fury, pulling at the edges of his vision. "This needs to stop. Get ready," he commanded, gripping the hilt like a lifeline. In a flash, the air shifted, swirling around them as the fabric of reality trembled. "What have you done?" the specter roared, the ground rumbling beneath their feet. All the shadows, all the whispers, converged into one agonizing howl, echoing through the chamber. "George!" Emma shouted, alarmed, as the darkness surged, ready to retaliate. Would their desperate act awaken a greater horror, or could it finally unlock the gruesome truth hidden within the temple? The temple shook again, echoes swirling in chaos, and George felt the ground beneath them threatening to collapse. What lay beyond this moment? The moment George plunged the dagger into the altar, a violent wave of energy rippled through the temple. The shadows screeched like banshees, echoing off the ancient stones, their rage morphing into a monstrous roar. George staggered, disoriented from the tumult. An unnatural light flickered around them, blinding yet illuminating, revealing macabre murals on the walls, desperate pleas for mercy, sacrifices made in darkness, and twisted faces screaming in pain. "What did you do?" Emma gasped, stepping back, eyes wide with terror. The air grew thick with tension, suffocating in its intensity. I had to," George stammered, fighting against the rise of panic tightening his throat. He looked back toward Mia's specter, but she writhed within her own shadowy prison, the knife-esque glow illuminating her distorted features. Her mouth opened to scream, yet no sound escaped, only the thundering noise of chaos enveloped them. The altar quaked violently, splintering the ground around them. Cracks spiderwebbed across the stone floor like veins of a dying beast. "George!" Emma shouted, pulling him away from the altar. "We need to get out of here." "No!" he snapped, refusing to move. "We can't just leave her." The dagger glinted ominously, and with it, a dreadful realization hit him square in the chest. He wasn't just battling the darkness surrounding them, he was awakening something ancient, something trapped for centuries. It was no mere sacrificial dagger, it was the key to unspeakable horrors. Emma's breath quickened as the walls closed in, shadows squeezing tighter around them. "There's no turning back now. We have to face it." Suddenly, the spectral Mia collapsed into a flurry of shadows, merging with the darkness. Shadowy figures began rising around them, grotesque forms crawling from the void. Their elongated limbs twitched as they approached, eyes glowing hellish orbs hungry for life. George's heart raced. Emma, support me. We need to break this cycle somehow. What about Mia? She looked around nervously, hands trembling. The altar trembled again, as if it were a living entity, trying to reclaim control. Don't let it take you. George shouted, urging her to focus as he reached for the hilt of the dagger, feeling warm blood trickle down the blade, a visceral reminder of all that had transpired. I need you to trust me. He yelled, and with a swift, determined movement, he wrenched the dagger from the altar and raised it high. The shadow figures halted, drawn to the blade as it pulsed, illuminating them in a searing light. The air crackled with energy, bracing against the weight of despair. Their cries of torment transformed into a cacophony of fury, shaking the very essence of the temple. Emma stepped forward, gripping George's arm. What do we do? His mind raced with possibilities, memories of ancient tales whispered around campfires filtering back. We expel them. He shouted, conviction flooding into his voice. With one thrust of the dagger, he aimed at the swirling mass of shadows. Get behind me. He commanded. But the very act of thrusting the dagger fractured the ground beneath them. The walls groaned, stone grinding against stone, as if suddenly aware of the knife's purpose. The shadows recoiled but didn't disappear. Instead, they burst forward, a tidal wave of darkness fueled by centuries of hate. George. Emma's scream pierced through the chaos as she was nearly pulled into the maelstrom. He surged forward, battling against the force of the dark, grappling with unseen hands that clawed desperately at him. In the throes of terror, he felt a rush. The dagger glowed brighter, responding to his fury. You will not have her. He shouted, defiance roaring from his lungs. The shadow shrieked, and with a mighty heave, he plunged the dagger into the churning darkness. Light exploded, blinding them both as the howls of agony echoed with unprecedented rage. But within that explosion, against a backdrop of otherworldly screams, a darker truth stirred, a truth that had remained hidden for eons. As the light began to fade, a figure emerged from the very heart of the chaos, cloaked in shadow, towering and terrible. George's breath caught in his throat, fear twisting his thoughts. Your sacrifice has awoken me, it boomed. And now you shall know true darkness. What had they unleashed? What sacrifice would tangle them in the threads of horror yet to come? The dark figure loomed larger, its presence pouring dread into their veins. Emma felt a chill wrap around her spine, a perverse whisper coiling in her mind. She could see a hint of movement, shadows shifting, writhing like snakes dancing in the depths of an unseen abyss. Panic clawed at her throat, but she forced herself to breathe. George, we need to move. She urged, attempting to pull him back. Yet he stood paralyzed, trapped in the malevolent gaze of the apparition. Stay back. He shouted. His eyes were wide, reflecting a mix of defiance and terror. The air thickened with a palpable sense of foreboding. The shadows whispered secrets, words vaguely familiar yet twisted beyond recognition. Was it calling to him? Drawing him closer? Your foolish act has awakened me, the figure said again, its voice a rumble of thunder. Each word dripped with venomous delight. The shadows surged forward, and George gripped the dagger tighter, its cold steel feeling alive in his palm. With every pulse of energy radiating from the dagger, he felt the force of the darkness challenging him. What do you want? He yelled defiantly, regretting the question the moment it left his lips. You shall witness your deepest fears, the creature hissed. And any light you cling to will be extinguished. Suddenly, the shadows enveloped Emma, pulling her away from George. No! He screamed, instinctively lunging toward her. He felt the darkness clawing at him, trying to ensnare his sanity. The dagger vibrated violently, as if resisting the pull of the void beneath. Emma! He shouted again, voice cracking with desperation, but all he saw were tortured faces erupting from the darkness, horrid apparitions that twisted and distorted, faces he recognized, faces of friends and family lost to time. They screamed silently, mouths opening wide in abject horror, their eyes hollow and pleading. Your suffering feeds me. The figure bellowed, an echo reverberating in the vast, open space of the temple. George's heart raced. He shoved the dagger toward the creature, disappointed by the feeble light it emitted against this overwhelming darkness. Get away from her! He roared, but the shadows laughed, a cacophony of maniacal screeches that reverberated through the ancient stone and burrowed deep within his mind. Join us, George, the creature urged, an unearthly smile stretching across its grotesque face. Embrace the dark to save the light. The shadows tightened around Emma, each moment stretching painfully, as if this temple choked the precious breath from her lungs. George could hardly think. His world boiled down to a single image, Emma, struggling against her bonds, terrified, yet still clinging to hope. The shadows tugged at the edges of his consciousness, tempting images of his failures, the arguments, the moments lost in time. Yet, amidst the torment, a thought broke through the cloud of despair: this wasn't their end. With every ounce of strength, George surged forward, driving the dagger into the darkness, feeling a rush of power flow through him. The dagger blazed, shooting a brilliant beam of light that tore through the murky void, scattering fragments of shadow, revealing glimpses of the temple's past figures in ceremonial garb, blood-stained altars, and unimaginable horrors carving their legacies into stone. No! Roared the figure, darkness swirling in protest, grappling with the light. Let her go! George cried out, pushing with every desperate beat of his heart. He could feel the cold tendrils of despair fading, and beneath it all, a glimmer of hope flickered. Remember us, Mia! He shouted into the abyss, hoping against hope that their bond could pierce this curse. The air vibrated violently as the shadows thrashed. But as the darkness began to crumble, lurking tendrils wrapped tighter around Emma. In her eyes, he saw the flicker dim. George, the words faltered, lost in the chaos. The anguished screech of the shadows filled the air, but just as George felt triumphant, a new, malevolent whisper slipped through the chaos. This isn't over. You have only just begun to understand. And as the shadows pulsated and the ground shook beneath them, he realized one chilling truth: what they had awakened was not just a force of darkness, but something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface, something with its own horrific agenda. What other unspeakable truths awaited them? What storm were they truly unleashing upon themselves? The darkness roared, thrashing wildly, as George felt the dagger pulse in his hand, flickering like a dying light bulb. The shadows folded around Emma tighter, weaving a net of despair that made his heart race. He could barely hear her whimpers over the cacophony of shrieks piercing the air. Stay strong, Emma, he yelled, forcing himself to keep moving forward, eyes fixed on the shadowy mass that seemed to ripple with menace. He was terrified, yet the thought of losing her drove him onward. Suddenly, the shadows twisted, expanding outward like a beast stretching after a long slumber. They recoiled from the dagger's light yet reached for George and Emma with new fervor. You think you can save her, the figure hissed, its twisted face revealing rows of jagged teeth. George raised the dagger higher, feeling its brilliance push back the creeping darkness. You don't understand. I'll do anything to save her. Anything? The figure laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Then watch closely. Without warning, the shadows reshaped themselves, and George was overcome with a sudden vision, memories flooding back in blinding clarity. He saw his childhood home, warm and inviting, filled with laughter until the day it all exploded in flames. His parents' faces twisted in horror as they called for him, that terror ingrained forever in his mind. Then darkness swallowed that scene, a flash, a scream. He was back in the temple, but Emma was gone. Panic and anguish clawed within him. No. Where is she? Do you want to know the truth of your past? The figure growled, its voice layered with malice. The truth you buried so deep, it festers like an unhealed wound. The shadows began to morph, memories spilling forth, visions of regret and pain, accusations echoing at him. You ran from responsibility. You neglected your love. You let fear drive you away. George staggered back, clutching his head as the memories assailed him. Shut up. I'm not afraid of you, he screamed, but with every protest, the shadows pushed deeper into his mind, dragging up ghost after ghost, each taunting him with lost chances and wasted time. Suddenly, in the midst of his despair, something inside him sparked a fragile flicker of resolve, igniting against the encroaching void. He focused on Emma, her face framed within his heart, and steeled himself. "You're wrong. I won't let you control me." He plunged forward, the dagger slicing through the air. The force of his emotion mustered its own strength behind the blade, blazing brightly, forcing the shadows to recoil. "I refuse to be your pawn." "Emma," his voice trembled, desperation mixing with determination. "I will find you." The darkness writhed in agony, shifting and twisting as though trying to escape the radiance of the dagger. An unholy scream erupted as the arcane energies clashed violently, filling the temple with blinding light and deafening noise. Then a palpable silence fell. George stood alone, drenched in sweat, the dagger scales glowing across the collapsed stone altar. But the space was eerily empty. The shadows had retracted, evaporated like mist in dawn. Emma was gone. Frantically, he called out, "Emma." His voice echoed back, a hollow whisper in the void. Where had they taken her? Cold dread pooled in his stomach. Was this all part of the creature's twisted game? He clenched the dagger, the very thought ignited his resolve. He wasn't done yet. The temple still held secrets, and George was determined to uncover them, no matter the cost. Sweat dripped down his brow, and heart pounding, he stepped forward into the darkness, ready to confront whatever awaited him, but lurking in those shadows, something stirred, a presence all its own, whispering promises of power and knowledge. "What if you uncovered the truth about your past?" it crooned, voice silky and inviting. "What power could you wield then?" With every step deeper into the darkness, the burden of what he might find pressed down on him. Would he uncover the path to save Emma or doom himself to the very horrors he feared? The air thickened around him as whispers grew louder, beckoning him closer to the edge of the abyss. What other secrets awaited in the shadows? What sacrifices would he have to make? George's heart thundered in his chest as he advanced into the thickening shadows, the air around him crackling with unnerving energy. With every step, the weight of despair threatened to pull him down into the abyss. Each whisper grew more incessant, slithering into his mind like a serpent probing for weak spots. "Are you really prepared to face what lies within you?" The voice purred, an echo swirling around him. "Your past is not just dark, it is a labyrinth of horrors waiting to be uncovered. Embrace it, George." A shiver slithered up his spine at the thought. Memories flashed like lightning, the outburst during his childhood, the faces of his parents melting into anguish as the flames consumed his home. He gritted his teeth, unwilling to give in. Not now. He needed focus. The dagger pulsed, casting a warm glow against the shrouded walls of the temple. Shadows warped and writhed as if in pain, flickering like a campfire flame caught in a gust of wind. Suddenly, George caught sight of movement, figures forming within the darkness, grotesque and shifting. "Join us," they rasped, voices a chorus of torment. "You know the truth. You feel it inside you. Free yourself from the shackles of guilt." "No," George shouted, steeling himself against their eager pull. He could not deny them his strength. Not again. Blinding fury surged within him. "You're not real." The figures shifted, distorting into images that housed fragments of forgotten faces. People he had once loved and abandoned. Their eyes were filled with betrayal, each haunting gaze digging into his consciousness. "Every life you touched, every moment lost, where were you when they needed you the most?" They wailed, a whirlwind of sorrow twisting around him. "Stop." His voice trembled, wavering between defiance and despair. But the shadows answered with maniacal laughter, an uproar that echoed off the temple walls. That I and the confounding chaos, a flicker caught his eye. A door loomed before him, half hidden within the dense gloom. It looked ancient, carved with cryptic symbols that pulsed with dormant energy, drawing him closer. A chance. A way forward. As George approached, the shadows sneered. "It won't end well for you there. Beneath that door lurks your biggest fear, your greatest sin, the truth about who you really are." He pressed pause, heart racing as a chilling realization swept over him. This was not just about Emma or the dark figure. It was about confronting himself, the cowardice he had masked with false bravado, the moments he let slide into the abyss of neglect. With gritted teeth, George seized the dagger, its glow illuminating the door's edges. He knew, even as uncertainty clawed at him, that he needed to face what lay beyond. He had to dig deeper, despite the mounting terror wrapping itself around his throat. "You want the truth?" he growled, pushing against the door. "Then show me." As the door creaked open, a gust of icy air erupted, swirling within the chamber. He stepped inside, the dagger's light flickering desperately against the suffocating darkness. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked and menacing. It spoke with a voice that chilled the very marrow in his bones. "Welcome, George. Are you ready to uncover the sinister legacy of your family, or will you turn back like the coward you've always been?" The thin line of fear and determination tugged at him, knotting tighter with each word. This was it. The moment that could either save him and Emma or destroy them both. As the heavy silence lodged itself in his throat, the truth lingered just out of reach, pulsating with ominous power. Would he have the strength to face it? Or would the shadows consume him in their eternal darkness? The door slammed shut behind him, sealing his fate. What other secrets had lain hidden within his family? What horrors awaited him now? The darkness swallowed George whole, each breath growing heavier with the weight of anticipation. The figure before him coiled tighter like a serpent, its form shifting as the shadows wrapped around it. George tightened his grip on the dagger, the warmth of its glow a fragile shield against the encroaching cold. "Your legacy, George," the figure taunted, its voice slithering like smoke. "It's far more than what you ran from. You think fear alone is your enemy? Oh, no. It's the truth that devours." He could feel every pulse of the dagger in his hand, a stark reminder of the power he had been gifted or cursed with. That voice was all too familiar, drawing forth a cruel clarity. This was not just an adversary but a reflection, an embodiment of the very guilt and shame he had buried deep beneath layers of denial. "Stop hiding. It's time to reveal the darkness," it hissed, and as if to emphasize the command, the shadows surged, coiling around George's legs like creeping ivy, threatening to drag him down. He stumbled back, heart racing, fire igniting within. This was not the end. "Tell me what you want," he shouted, each word a desperate attempt to claw back control. "You think you can scare me? I've faced worse." "Have you?" the figure whispered, its breath chilling, sending needles of frost spiraling down his spine. "No, George. You haven't faced anything yet. But you will." As it spoke, the shadows peeled back enough to reveal glimpses of past horrors, taunting scenes from a life he thought he had escaped. His childhood home engulfed by flames. The screams of his parents echoing, the flames dancing to a rhythm of chaos. George staggered. Those memories were not just specters, they were anchors dragging him through murky waters of regret. "Breathe, George," the figure cooed, its voice now wrapping around him like a comforting shroud. "All you need to do is allow yourself to remember what you've forgotten, the sins that define you." With every word, the air grew dense, constricting his thoughts, crushing him. He felt himself slipping. "No," he croaked, fear clawing at his throat, but the shadows danced happily, feasting on his despair. Then it shifted, forming clear images of faces he wished he could erase, friends he abandoned, innocence caught in the crossfire of his own cowardice. They reached out with trembling fingers, mouths moving but sounds lost in the thick fog of memory. "You turned your back," he clamped his eyes shut, forcing the visions away. "I want to listen," he screamed, pushing against them, though part of him quaked with fear that they were right. And then, he felt it a tug deep within his chest, an aching emptiness, as if the shadows could taste his anguish. "Reveal the truth or be lost," the figure warned, its voice now slicing through the chaos like a knife. The dagger flared, the intensity rising as shadows pulled back just a fraction, revealing the heart of the temple, a twisted altar, drenched in darkness. A promise of confrontation. "Face your legacy," the cloaked figure mocked, its eyes glowing like molten coal. With sudden defiance, George lunged towards the altar. "I want to be a prisoner of my past. I'll break the cycle." He roared. As he reached the altar, the ground heaved beneath him, stones cracking, shadows swirling with fury. The dagger flared blindingly, and within that light, he glimpsed fragments of his ancestors' faces filled with dread, hands stained with sins long buried. That he knew he was on the brink of something irreversible. "Do you wish to embrace your family's true legacy, George?" The figure shrieked, laughter echoing through the chaos. The shadows thickened, surrounding him in a maelstrom of torment. This wasn't just a battle for his soul, it was a fight for salvation. Could he find the truth that lay hidden, or would he be consumed by the darkness? As the dagger's light flickered defiantly against the creeping night, George understood he was not just fighting an external terror but the living embodiment of his own guilt and fear. "What if your legacy was more than you can bear?" It whispered, tension coiling around him like a viper ready to strike. The shadows tightened, breaths caught, and George stood poised at the edge of revelation. What awaited him at that altar? Would this be the dawn of his reckoning or the dusk of his very existence? The light from the dagger pulsed rhythmically in George's hand, casting eerie shadows that danced around the twisted altar. He felt the weight of his family's dark legacy pressing down on him, an overwhelming presence that both terrified and emboldened him. "Face it, George." The cloaked figure hissed, shadows swirling with palpable energy. "Your fears, your failures, they define you. Embrace them, and you can wield their power." He thought of Emma, of Mia, the faces of those he loved, trapped by a curse that had its roots deep in this very place. He couldn't allow the darkness to win. "No!" he shouted back, his voice resounding like thunder. "I won't succumb to fear. I refuse to be a pawn in this twisted game." With renewed determination, he plunged the dagger into the altar, a surge of light exploding forth. The shadows screamed as the radiant energy splintered their dark grasp, illuminating the chamber and forcing back the encroaching darkness. As the shadows writhed in agony, a blinding portal opened above the altar. Glimpses of a different reality flickered within the life George could have led had he faced his past, had he chosen light over darkness. "Mia! Emma!" he cried out, his heart racing. He knew the portal offered more than a mere escape. It was a chance to break the cycle, to rewrite his family's grim legacy. The figure roared in fury, its form twisting and contorting in the face of George's resolve. "You think you can just walk away? You will never escape me." Shadows surged, swarming toward him with menacing speed. George braced himself, focusing on the warmth surrounding the dagger. "I don't need to run. I need to fight," he declared, raising the dagger high. With a single swift motion, he carved through the mass of darkness, the blade glowing brightly as he struck. The shadows recoiled, screeching as if they were being torn apart. The air crackled with energy, reality itself bending under the strain of his defiance. Suddenly, he felt a touch, gentle yet firm, on his shoulder. He turned to see Emma beside him, her face glowing with determination. "You're not alone," she whispered, her voice cutting through the turmoil. A bond stronger than fear united them. "Together," George replied. Emma nodded, reaching for the dagger and adding her strength to the light. Their combined bravery pushed back the shadows, forcing them to unravel before their shared will. Deep within the pulsing light, George felt Mia's presence, innocent, unbroken, and he couldn't let anything take that away from her. "Look, George." "The altar," Emma shouted, pointing. As they stood together, the portal grew larger, the light brighter, revealing the truth within. Images flashed. He saw fragments of lives lost, sacrifices made, and moments of cowardice that festered in darkness. But then, flickers of joy illuminated these memories, laughter shared, love exchanged, lessons learned. It was a tapestry of life, the good intertwined with the bad, carving a path toward redemption. "This is your legacy, George," Emma said. "Not just darkness, but the choice to rise above it." George nodded fiercely, the dagger vibrating with newfound energy. "This ends here." Harnessing their united strength, they thrust the dagger into the altar again, and with it, unleashed a wave of incandescent light that enveloped the chamber. They were the architects of their fate, returning the energy back to the roots of the temple. The shadows howled as they began to dissolve, unraveling like old fabric. The cloaked figure fought fiercely, but as the light expanded, it found itself being consumed, its cries blending with the desperate wails of regret and sorrow. With a blinding flash, the temple trembled violently, its ancient stones cracking and crumbling under the force of the magic unleashed. George and Emma held each other tight, feeling the ground shake beneath them. "Now," George urged, his heart pounding against his chest. "We can save her." Together, they sprinted toward the portal, the light wrapping around their bodies, pulling them closer. The darkness behind them shrieked one last time before being swallowed completely, replaced by blinding radiance. As they leapt through the portal, George felt the weight of centuries lift from his shoulders. They emerged in the sunlight, breathless and alive, standing in the same grove where the journey had begun. "Mia!" he shouted, looking around frantically. And then he saw her. There she was, standing in the clearing, a bit bewildered but safe, smiling, her stuffed bear clutched in her hands. "Daddy!" she called out, and in that moment, George knew he had defeated the darkness that threatened to engulf them. He swooped her into his arms, tears streaming down his face as he held his family close once more. Emma wrapped her arms around them, a moment of pure joy blooming amidst the remnants of darkness fading into memory. "Together, we faced it," Emma whispered, her voice steady. "And we won." As they stood united beneath the bright sky, George felt the burdens of the past begin to dissolve, replaced by a fierce hope for the future, a future built on love and courage. But deep within the roots of the island, whispers of darkness faded, but remnants lay waiting. Waiting for another chance before you go. This is your moment. You need to subscribe now so you won't miss our next exclusive stories. Smash that like button now to help feed the algorithm. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about this ending. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to experience this conclusion. Your support is what keeps this story alive, so show it today.